Welcome back to another special edition of Why Blank Lost, as we continue our series of Why Blank Won podcasts in parallel with the RHAP Survivor Season rankings. I'm David Bloomberg, and joining me on this journey of many seasons is, of course, my co-host, Jessica Lewis.
Hello again, and welcome back to another journey through time. Very excited to discuss this particular season of Survivor Samoa. It is a very talked about and controversial season, if you will. So we have a lot to discuss. I'm very, very excited about this.
Yes, and indeed, we are here this week to discuss why Natalie won. But before we do that, we would like to take a moment to honor Sunday Burquest, who I'm sure most listeners know passed away last weekend.
Yes, and as you can see, David and I are both paying homage to her, celebrating her life with the buffs, Sunday buffs, and also the t-shirt that David is wearing. As many of you probably know, she did suffer from various forms of cancer and did pass away. There was a celebration of life for her just on Friday, and it was an incredible, beautiful service, and really, truly was a celebration. Sunday was an inspiration and will continue to be, not only for her survivor family, but I think everyone that she has ever touched in her life. So I was blessed to have played with her and to know her, and we will celebrate her today. So this is in memory of Sunday.
Yes. I never got a chance to meet Sunday, though I did talk to her on social media. One thing about her was that she never gave up. She never quit. She always seemed to keep a positive attitude, way more positive than I would have kept in that situation.
Yes.
And, you know, the survivor community as a whole will miss her. And my thoughts continue to be with her family.
Yes, mine as well. So hopefully we can move on and still have a good podcast but we are remembering her today.
Yes. And, you know, it is interesting that we're talking about Natalie this week, because when I podcasted about Sunday with Rob, which of course was the first iteration of this podcast, was me and Rob, I noted that she used her social game as a primary weapon, and Zeke, who, by the way, was the one who, created the buff you're wearing, the one I have back there. Here's a closer up version of it. He said in post-game interviews that Sunday had a tremendous social game that was very subtle and quiet, and that she was friends with everybody. Furthermore, it was her goal to be someone who people thought they could beat at the end. I think we'll see a lot of similarities as we move forward to talk about Natalie.
Yes, I really do think that the social game component is something that is very much underrated in Survivor, because as we have discussed multiple times, it's the big moves that you can really see in an edit, right? Those are the easier things for production to really focus on. Someone finding an idol, someone playing an idol, people strategizing, blind sides. Those are all things that are very TV worthy. But something as quiet as having a moment in the shelter with someone and connecting on a very real personal level is very difficult to edit into a show. And so I do feel like that social component is lacking on an edit, even though it could be the strongest component of someone's game.
Yes, and something tells me we'll get to discuss more of that as we go through here.
I think so.
Yeah. Now, as we've discussed, we're focusing on two groups of winners for these podcasts. Those who make us wonder how they won, and those who did such a good job that we think it's worth discussing them. So far, we've mostly done the former category, and that's where we are again today with Natalie. I have to admit, even as I rewatched the whole season, and especially the final tribal council, I still found myself wondering how the heck she won, based solely on what we saw on TV. But that just reminds us how important it is for us to follow our path like we always do during a normal Survivor season, which is comparing how she played to the rules I originally wrote way back after season 1. And of course, comparing Russell's play as well, because much like we saw in the case of Fabio, perhaps multiplied several times over, Natalie's win is directly linked with the losses of Russell and Mick, though mostly Russell. If you'd like to refamiliarize yourself with the rules, you can check out the most recent version at robhasawebsite.com/blog/survivor rules. Or you can get the shorter and much more colorful version of the rules in poster form at tinyurl.com/davidrulesposter2.
Yes, you
And-
absolutely should order. It is there. It is back here. And I'm going to attempt to move this because we must note that way at the bottom, you can see
Mhm.
Appendix B there. Just so happens to be Natalie White and Russell Hantz.
Yes. Yes. Now, in addition to the poster, we also have another way to get the rules, so you can always have them in t-shirt form. And again, hey, look, who's that in the corner there?
There they are.
So for the t-shirt, go to robhasawebsite.com or robhasapodcast.com. Click the merch link near the top. That will take you to the newer and larger RHAP shop that covers all sorts of stuff. You can either scroll through to find ours, or you can search for rules or something like that. And you can find not just this design, but also a newer design of a checklist of the rules. And you can even get the checklist on a mug.
You should order everything. Have it all over your house.
Yes.
People will love it.
It should be your whole wardrobe.
It should be. And inclusive of work stuff. If you have a desk, have a mug, all kinds of good things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I have a poster in my office. And I know
I have some
other people
Survivor
do.
memorabilia.
Yeah. So, and people who don't know me walk up and go, either they don't say anything or they look at it and go, what is that?
It's a good conversation starter.
Yes. Yes. And it's also a good way to find fellow Survivor fans in your office.
Absolutely.
So anyway, before we get to the rules, as always, there are some things I want to mention about this season. Now, we just discussed Gabon last week, when, of course, the focus was on a guy who was likable and good in challenges at the end. And this season was almost a parallel when Brett suddenly showed up as a likable guy from Galoo who won several immunity challenges in a row and would have won the season if he had made it to the end.
Yeah.
The difference was that when he lost the last challenge, he got voted out instead of being saved, which, of course, we discussed is what theoretically should have happened to Bob, but Brett didn't have a sugar.
Yeah, and you know what was interesting? I honestly didn't remember Brett when the season started, and I remembered thinking as throughout the rewatch that he wasn't being overly edited and really wasn't included very much in what was happening on the show. He was there, he was present, but not an overarching presence at all. And then all of a sudden at the end, you're like, oh, who's this guy Brett? And where's he coming from? And it was interesting because even Jeff Probst noted that about Brett, that like, were maybe you just kind of playing it a little bit safe and quiet so you could sneak in at the end. And maybe that really was what his goal was. And if it was, well, then he did it flawlessly.
Yes, I did get a question from a listener of if Brett won, would he have been, like the worst winner ever? And I said, well, we don't know because we didn't see the Brett wins edit. He might have been doing things that we just don't know about.
Right. Exactly.
So, but there was another parallel. So you just mentioned that, you forgot Brett was even there. And when it started, I didn't remember Brett at all. Like last week, I forgot Susie was in the final three. I also forgot Mick was, made it to the end in Samoa. I mean, at least I remembered that he existed, but I had no memory of him being in the final three, which is somewhat understandable given what happened. I guess my memory of him isn't so much feckless as Mickless. But
wait a minute. I need to go look that up. I don't know what that means.
It means there's no Mick. Oh, you meant feckless. Okay. But even our poster, like I said before, look, who does it show there? It shows two people. It shows Natalie and Russell. He was just such a non-entity at the end.
Yeah. He was off to the side.
Yeah.
No, it is interesting because he was very similar to that same, who was the third person? Who was in the final three? And I do think that this is one of those Survivor seasons that makes me think again that they should go back to a final two. Because I don't, and listen, if anyone out there knows and can send it along, let me know. But when have we ever seen three people sitting in the final three, in the final tribal council, and all of them get votes?
I was thinking the exact same thing. And I don't think it's happened. And I think one reason is because they always bring along a patsy.
Yeah. So why
at
do
least one.
Yeah, like why are we doing that? Why are we?
We're doing it because of Rob Sesternino. Because
Mm.
he got voted out in third. And that happened. I mean, it's not just Rob. I'd like to say it's because of Rob, but it's not just Rob. But Rob, if you're listening, it is just you. It's all you.
It was Rob, you messed it up for
yes.
everybody.
But no, they messed it up for him. If they had done Final
they
Three
did.
before, because too many times the best player was voted out in third. So
I know, but now the best player is getting voted out fourth.
Exactly, which is why Jeff Probst brought fire making back.
It's so ridiculous.
Jeff just keeps trying to quote unquote fix a problem.
I know.
Instead of just letting it play out.
Yeah.
And that's what we said, I think, at the time was, okay, you've moved it from 2 to 3. Now you've moved 3 to 4. Mm-hmm. What's next? When players figure this out, they're just going to start eliminating the big players at fifth place. So what's next? Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I really do think that I almost feel bad for that third person that is sitting there, because it's not like they shouldn't be celebrated for making it as far as they did, but it's almost they're going through all of that and they're getting ripped apart, they're getting beat up, and they're getting pummeled. And it's not like they necessarily did a bad job. I mean, clearly they finished in the final 3, but they are not going to be considered a potential vote. So they're sitting there being ridiculed and pummeled and told how they did all of these things wrong. And then on top of it, a 0 vote finalist. And so it just, to me,
and then
feels
people come
unfair.
on a podcast and say why they
I know.
lost.
I know. So it's like, I'm sorry, Mick. I'm really sorry. But I just think that the structure of the show has changed, obviously, as you discussed. But I do think the final 2 makes more sense than a final 3, considering it really always comes down to 2 people.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it comes down to one person, when it gets right down to it. But, yeah. Anyway, so before we went off on that interesting tangent, we were talking about Gabon and how it was similar. But one way that it was the opposite of Gabon is that Russell was like the anti-Bob. Bob went out of his way to make people comfortable and happy. Russell went out of his way to make people miserable.
Literally went out of his way to make people miserable. Stealing socks, dumping water out, whole bunch of stuff that, and he even said that was his goal. He wanted to make people uncomfortable, because if you can control how they feel, then you can control how they think, and then you can control them in the game. I mean, it was a very methodical decision. It was, well, I mean, I must say, sometimes when you see people doing things like that, it's usually out of spite. Like they're dumping the food or they're burning someone's hat, things that we've seen. It's a little more out of spite as opposed to gameplay. He was utilizing it as gameplay.
I don't know that it was good gameplay. It's
like, I'm not saying that it was good.
I mean, it ended up working to keep the core of the tribe together, but yeah. So yeah, when I say Russell was the anti-Bob, I'm thinking of like matter and antimatter. Like if the two of them ever met, they would probably just explode and both disappear. They would annihilate one of another, because they're such polar opposites.
They really are, for sure.
So, moving on from the Gabon comparisons, I will say that this season really showed how making it past just one vote can change everything. And we often talk about this. Don't give up. Just get past the next vote. You don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 days or 1 day or whatever. And in this season, the Foafoans turned Galoo inside out, one tribal council at a time.
Yes, they did.
And I mean, it was Galoo was terrible. I think Rob referred to them on the Patreon podcast as Galoozers. But yeah, I mean, it's still, the point is, you might go in 4 to 8 and you think we're dead, but no, you keep fighting, you keep trying, and you just don't know.
Yeah. And I do appreciate very much John's take on Galoo and how they were outmatched and by Foa just strategically and how they were processing things. I mean, John was really trying hard to get them to realize this is a bad idea. Like, we need to do this. We shouldn't be doing that. And they were very headstrong. Nope, this is how we're going to vote. We're going to vote for Russell, and that's it. And then what happens? Well, Russell plays an idol and Kelly goes home. And so
Right.
I really do think that John was very aware of what was happening and was trying to get Galoo to stop what they were doing because he saw the trajectory, which is why he started working with Russ.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he got himself voted out too.
Yeah. Well, you know, he was a rocket scientist.
I know,
So-
which I thought is amazing. I'm like, he's actually a rocket scientist.
Yeah, I think they may have, puffed that up a little bit because he has a degree in engineering. So if anything, he was a rocket engineer, not a rocket scientist. But,
I did find it amusing, though, when he referred to something as it
Not
not being rocket
Yeah.
science.
Yes.
If anybody should know, he should know, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was funny.
So, all right. Well, is there anything else about the season that you want to discuss before we get to the rules?
Well, there is, I'm sure, but if I jump to it now, you'll probably be like, don't jump ahead. We can't jump ahead. So
That's right.
so I'll be good and I'll hold off until we get there.
Okay. All right. Well, after the Samoa finale, I was overwhelmed by email from my website readers to the point that I had to apologize in my original Why Russell Lost article for not being able to respond to it all because there was so much. I mean, normally I'd reply to people.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember another time when this happened. Some people were seriously pissed.
I know.
And then there were the others who were defending Natalie. It was quite the controversy. Of course, I was there to clear it all up at the time, and now we'll do it again together. Natalie didn't come into the game of Survivor looking like a probable winner. Even through most of the season, she appeared to just be one of Russell's followers who would compete for second place at best. So how did she turn the tables on him? Russell thought he was the best player in history. He probably still thinks that. But the jury disagreed. What did Natalie do that he couldn't or wouldn't? Oh, I seem to
I
have
lost
disappeared.
David Bloomberg. He
Oh,
went away.
no. Yes,
That's
I'm
all
having
right.
a camera problem here. I apologize. I'm going to
He'll come back. I
restart.
promise you, ladies and gentlemen.
Here I
he
am.
is.
Yay. Okay. I don't know how that, well, I know how that happened. I don't know why it happened. Let's hope it doesn't happen again. And meanwhile, the people who are listening on the audio version are like, what are you talking about? We heard you the whole time. Anyway, so as I was saying, Russell thought he was the best player in history, and he probably still thinks that. But the jury disagreed. What did Natalie do that he couldn't or wouldn't? Where did he go wrong while she got it right? Now that we've done a Samoa rewatch and I've gone back over my older articles and interviews from its original airing, it's time to take a new look at why Natalie won.
Yes.
The first and most important rule says to scheme and plot. And this is the main reason Russell thought, and will always think, he should have won. He made it not only the focus of his game plan, but almost his entire game plan.
Yes.
I don't feel I really need to go into much detail here. Like normally we would list down everything, but everybody knows Russell was the best strategist on his season. Even Jeff Probst blogged about it at one point. Here is where the however hits, though. Back when this season aired, there was a part in this rule that said, it should be noted that the best schemer does not always win. While this is the most important rule, it is not the only one. Now, I don't have that specific language in there anymore because it's implied. Why have all these rules if only one matters? It still matters the most, but other things are also very important, and players need to be well-rounded enough to understand that. Russell was not. And we will, of course, get into all that as we progress through the rules. For now, let's just note that Russell did a great job here in Rule 1. As just one example, the rule says from the very beginning, you have to start making alliances and cementing relationships. And I do mean the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Russell doing just that on day one, making individual alliances with pretty much everyone on his tribe, including, of course, Natalie. And then he just kept on going. I just wanted to highlight that particular one. I said earlier, I'm not going to list everything because some people forget that. Some people hold back. They're like, well, let's see how things turn out. And then suddenly they're the first one voted off, because they haven't done that. But yeah, I mean, Russell did a great job in the first rule.
Yes, he did. And I do think that part of Russell's ability to do so well at this, I will say, though, is I want to give props to the people that he was playing the game with. because yes, he was going to them and he was making deals with multiple people and was talking to multiple people, but he was also playing with people that understood that same rule, if you will, that forming those relationships early on was necessary. And anybody that questioned Russell in his doing so then became his target. And so they were clearly on their game because they saw what he was doing and they saw that he was strategizing immediately. They saw that he was talking to everybody. And unfortunately, they failed in the, second rule, if you will, and then caused themselves to get voted out. So I do want to give credit to those people that were doing the same thing, but they did not carry it through because Russell was like, oh, okay, they're on to me. Now they got to go. Where they weren't doing the same thing. They were definitely letting him run around and scheme and plot instead of stopping it when they had an opportunity to do so.
Right. Yeah. Now, as we move on to Natalie, just as Russell had the strategy, but was missing some other elements of the game, Natalie probably would have lost if she didn't have any strategy herself. She could have had all the other elements, but no strategy. And in this season, I mean, we've recently talked about other seasons where people had essentially very little strategy and still won. But in this season, that wouldn't have cut it. And the fact is, she did have strategy. It wasn't just that she was friendly. She had a plan. As she told me, obviously, I would say I had a pretty decent strategy. I aligned with somebody from the first day who clearly wanted to take the bullets. I'm fine with letting him take the bullets. If it's more personal, which is how I think they felt, of course I wanted to play with him. I wanted him to underestimate me and think he can beat me, and that's exactly what I did. It was daily that I would stroke his ego and be like, you're the best player in the game. That was all strategic. Everything I did was strategic. And, Natalie had a bit more to say in that quote, but the rest of it deals with a different rule, so we'll talk about it when we get there. But the fact is, she would have been booted much sooner if it hadn't been for her extremely tight alliance with Russell and her willingness to plot her way to the top right alongside him. We saw her doing just that in the final five when the two of them were bouncing ideas off of each other on who to vote out. It wasn't just him telling her who should go. She was making the case for and against different people.
Yes. And I will say this too. She recognized that she was a young female, and very often what we see in Survivor is when you have the dynamic duo, if you will, which consists of the strong, powerful male who is making the decisions or attempting to, right? The one that will have blood on their hands. And then you have the person who a lot of individuals refer to as riding their coattails, like people said Natalie was doing. We saw that with Boston Rob and Amber. We saw that with Colby and Tina. This is something that is almost like, it's not a given, but it's something that has happened in Survivor, where the woman that ends up going along with the man ends up sometimes beating the man because she has a better ability to connect with the jury than the person who has the blood on their hands, which is usually the guy. And I think that she recognized that. And that's what she did. And she even talked about that in her interviews, that she saw what happened with those strong women who went against Russell and they got voted out. And so part of her strategy was to not be that perceived individual in the game where she was the one pushing and she was the one with the blood on her hands, and instead got people to like her, where Russell got people to not like him. And so I think that was part of her strategy as well. And she recognized that early on in the game and knew that that's what she needed to do.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up the alpha male and the younger female, because that's what Sugar intended to do. She said last week, we talked about Gabon, where she said that's what she intended to do with Ace. She just ended up knocking him out a little early, but she knocked him out because she knew that she could at the end face the perception that she rode his coattails the whole way.
Right.
She had that all planned out.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas, Natalie did ride the whole way with him, but had other plans as well. And, she did more than just ride coattails. We saw her sparking the idea of voting out Eric.
Yes.
Talking Laura and Kelly into making that move. Now, Russell, when I interviewed him, told me that was his idea. But the fact is, we saw her help get the ball rolling. And really, if his claim doesn't even make sense, if it was his idea, why did he play the idol?
Right. And also, he said, he goes, this is the first time I'm going into tribal council not knowing what's going to happen. He had no idea what was transpiring and why, because he wasn't inside of that little hut, where Natalie liked to hang out and form those relationships and bonds with people. She is the one that started that conversation. She's the one that went to Russell and said, we're voting out Eric. And he's like, what? This is happening? Who's voting for him? He didn't know. So I really do believe that was where the biggest shift in this game happened, was that vote. And that was all Natalie. I realize he wants to claim that he did it, but like you said, he shouldn't have played his idol if he knew that that's what was going to happen. And also, he wouldn't have been saying right before tribal council, I don't even know what's going on. Like, I don't even know what's going to happen. This is the first time I'm going to tribal council not knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. She convinced the Galu women that they could work with her, even as she remained completely attached to Russell. And then, the other thing is that Jason told me that he voted for Natalie because she made some strategic moves that allowed them to move forward. And this is what he said. If Eric doesn't go home first, none of that happens. He had the hidden idol in his pocket. I go home instead. Then they just pick us off one by one. I think we needed her, and she did what was necessary to help get to the finals, even though Russell made some big moves too.
Absolutely.
Her move helped save all of them.
Yes, that is what got that ball rolling in that direction. And I really do think that there's almost this interesting, we actually talked about this last week, this like mob mentality. And once you are able to break into that group and show that there is dissension within the ranks, then it's like a ripple effect. And all of a sudden you have Galu voting out Galu. And suddenly the other Galu members are looking at each other going, well, this is not what I expected. I thought we were all tight. I thought we were all together. And Foa is staying together. They are staying tight. And Foa is offering themselves up as 4 votes. Like, you can get 4 votes right here. We are strong. We're staying together, the 4 of us. Whereas Galu was not doing that. Galu was, people like Shambo were no longer Galu. And then you had people voting out Eric. And so you just start breaking down those walls, which makes it easier the next time you suggest to vote out a Galu, because they've already done it. So it's kind of like, well, we did it once, we could do it again. Oh, well, we did it that other time, we could do it again. And so I think that that's what we end up seeing in this season, is that once that wall is broken down, then anyone will vote out a Galu.
Yeah. And I mean, a big part of it is something we've seen before. There can be one tribe dominating the whole way through. But what are they not doing? They're not resolving their inner dissension.
Right.
So it just boils up as, Shambo and Laura hate each other, but neither of them can do anything about it. It just keeps building and building, whereas in Foa, someone wasn't liked, off they go.
Right.
And it made that 4 tight, super tight. Whereas the 8 on Galu, they never really, there were tight pockets in there, but it was just not the same. Now, I'm not advocating that, tribes should purposely throw or anything like that in the future, although sometimes it may be a good idea. If Galu thought that Shambo was going to flip, then throw a challenge and get rid of her. Why?
Right.
The thing was, they probably didn't think it mattered because it was 8-4. 8-4, you can have one person flip. Then it's 7-5. It's only if 2 people are going to flip that you have to worry.
And I do think, though, that there is a lot that comes from the constant losing. When you have a tribe that is losing over and over and over again, and everyone's kind of suffering through that together, I do think that brings people closer together because they understand what it feels like to lose. And they also understand what it feels like to go to tribal council. Galu didn't really need to do a whole lot of strategizing and voting people out because they weren't losing. And so when you don't have that familiarity with the process and what's going to come from it, and you don't have the opportunity to kind of react to voting somebody out, I do think that it can catch you off guard. And I think that's what happened with Glue, is because all of a sudden here comes the merge and they really need to start playing the game, but they really haven't been playing the game up to that point. And now they are outmatched by people who have been having to strategize 24/7 for the entire time they're there because they're constantly going to tribal council.
Right. Continuing with Natalie, last week I read an extended quote from Professor Jeffrey Sadow, who wrote the strategic overview of Survivor column for me at the time. And based on what he said about Gabon, throw away your DVDs, burn your VCR tapes, you might expect that he wasn't very happy with a Natalie win. But you'd be wrong. He said to argue that Natalie's win was undeserved in some fashion, or at least an affront to strategy, fundamentally misunderstands the role of strategy in Survivor. In their comments, to some degree, Eric and John recognized this oversight as they tried to steer Natalie away from crediting her presence in front of them only to perseverance. They coaxed her to reflect that she realized she had to lie low in a tribe being decimated to stay in the game. This then put her into position where Russell had to keep her for numbers. Because she contrasted favorably with him, it provided her as an alternative worthy winner to him. In doing so, she showed that there was a reason to vote for, that she had executed a plan, as jerry-rigged and simplistic as it was. He also noted, one gets the sense that it was more a happy confluence for her. Had there not been a Russell-like character in the game, she might not have gone far, or she might have gone far, but not had the ability to exploit somebody to set up the pieces and make the moves to get her in front of the jury. Now, he's right, but of course we'll never know that, which is one reason that I have wanted to see her return, to play without a Russell. But for this season, it didn't matter. She used a strategy that worked for the situation she was in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Now, as they say on commercials, but wait, there's more. Both Natalie and Jason told me that she worked to keep Russell's name off of people's lips when they were considering who they should target, even back in the early Foa days. She would deflect that attention somewhere else, helping him to stick around. She was a partner to him, not just letting him do all the work while she sat back. They might not have exactly been equal partners, and I would still say Russell was certainly a much better schemer, but she was also playing the game.
I think that is a great way to describe them, because I really did, on this rewatch, had the ability to watch Natalie in a new light. Mm-hmm. Because it's different when you know who the winner is, when you're watching the season over, because you're paying more attention to things that you might have missed when you were just watching the season without knowing.
Paying more attention, taking notes, transcribing the notes, doing a podcast.
It changes things for sure. And I really did notice that there was a very close partnership between the two of them. He never talked down to Natalie. I think he yelled at her like once because he thought that she was dishonest with him. But when they would talk with each other, it really sounded like they were communicating, where he was speaking to her, she was speaking to him. They were bouncing ideas off of each other, and they worked incredibly well together. And so I don't think you have a Russell without a Natalie. He knew that too, going into this game, that he needed to bring somebody along with him, as he referred to the Dumb Girl Alliance or something at the beginning. So he was aware of what he needed, and Natalie was aware of what she needed. And so the two of them melded together beautifully and really were able to play the game so well together. I don't think one could have survived without the other.
Yeah, I agree. And then there's Mick. Yeah, exactly. And this is basically what we'll do with Mick the whole time. It's a bit hard to say if he schemed and plotted. We didn't see much of him doing it other than agreeing with whatever Russell had. But he told me he was an equal participant in the decision making. Quote, we all knew about whatever plans that were set forth, and we would check in about this. What do you think our next move should be? But they just showed Russell going around telling us. There were several times where he thought it should be a certain way, but it was all done by consensus. Okay, but he also admitted to me that there were opportunities to overthrow Russell, and he never took advantage of it.
I know. And that was the thing that really struck me the most in the rewatch as well, was that there were so many missed opportunities. And he was, I will say this for Mick, he at least discussed that possibility and was playing with that idea that maybe we could. But again, if we go back to Natalie, if Natalie was the one stopping that from occurring and kind of putting the kibosh on this idea of voting out of Russell, then Russell needs to credit the fact that he stayed in the game to Natalie, because perhaps that's what happened.
Right.
And she discussed doing that. We saw her doing that. And then you've got Mick and Jason both talking about this idea of voting out Russell, but then nobody pulling the trigger. And I feel like that came from somewhere. So at least he attempted to think about that, and they kind of played through the options. But I do think that Mick was a very likable person, and I think he was hoping to rely upon that as much as Natalie was, that he was someone that came across as a likable individual, and that perhaps they'll like me more than they would like someone like Russell.
Yeah. All right, we can move to the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Now, when I started writing up my notes for this podcast, I was getting ready to talk about all the over scheming Russell did this season. And then I looked back at my original Why Russell Lost article. And there I had said that the smart people who read my articles knew that Russell didn't really break the second rule. Well, crap. I called my future self dumb. So I figured I'd better rethink it. And so here is my old and now renewed thought process. Russell played the game harder than anybody else, but he didn't overdo it because what he did worked. Sure, he made multiple day one alliances, but even as he knocked out supposed ally after supposed ally, the ones he kept continued to believe he was loyal to them. Sometimes that person could have just as easily been gone, but Russell chose differently, so they believed in Russell. Whenever anybody showed the slightest hesitation or knew something Russell didn't want them to know, as you mentioned, they were gone. Marisa, Betsy, Ben, Ashley. They couldn't complain to their tribe mates about how Russell had betrayed them because they weren't there anymore.
Yeah.
When they were no longer of any use to Russell, he dropped them. But at the same time, Jason, Mick, Natalie, and later Shambo continued to believe they were the chosen ones because they were in the group he was stringing along until he didn't need them anymore, as Shambo and Jason eventually found out. So he was never caught by those who were still in the game. Even amongst those on the jury, only Jason really held a grudge because of this situation. Everybody else in the jury was mad at him for different reasons that we'll get to soon, because he didn't really backstab Galu. He just surprised them. And there's a difference. And that's this rule is that difference.
And I really I was impressed with his ability to have very uncomfortable conversations with people, but almost make it come across like he was doing them a favor. I really thought that it was impressive. His ability to understand the nuances of that type of conversation. Like, okay, listen, so this is what they're talking about. They're talking about voting you out. And so this is the situation that we're in. I can't save you. He always had this ability to make it seem as if it was somebody else's idea and that he was just part of it. But I can give you an offer. I can help you stay if you do X, Y, and Z. He's a really great salesman. And I must say that the fact that nobody caught on to that was impressive. That he was always presenting it as, he even did it with Natalie. He even talked to her at one point and said, I can't save you. If Brett wins immunity, I can't save you.
Right.
And almost made it okay for Natalie. She was like, well, this is going to suck. But it wasn't like he was to blame for what was transpiring. It was going to be Jason and Mick because they want to beat Brett and they want to keep the physical challenges here. So he was so good at that component of it that even though he had all of those conversations with people and had them with like everybody, the way that he delivered it was definitely on point and just an incredible representation of someone who is very, very good at manipulating people without them knowing they're being manipulated.
Right. Now, as for Natalie, she did fine with this rule, both for similar reasons that we talked about with Russell and also in a different way. We already discussed how she was a part of the plotting, but she was even less likely to get blowback from it because she was usually one step away from the results, with Russell taking the lead and therefore the bullets. And Mick was in a similar situation.
Yes. I don't think that either of them over-schemed and over-plotted at all.
No. So the third rule talks about being flexible. And how do you think Natalie did here?
I don't think she really needed to be flexible as far as FOA was concerned, because she was so locked in with Russell and they were really controlling everything from the start. So I think as far as her ability to work with what was transpiring, she did a great job. But I also think that she was really great at making, or kind of like determining, who she needed to work with in order to keep moving forward. So, and that would be inclusive of Galoo, where she, and I know we're going to get to, the social game component shortly, but so I think that she was a strange combination of knowing when she needed to be flexible, but it really depended upon who she was talking to at the time, because she and Russell were in control. They were,
right.
So they were the ones determining the final outcome and how things were going to transpire. But in order to get to that point, she also had the ability to maneuver herself through with various people in order to make those decisions.
Right. Yeah. Now, in my original article on why Natalie won, I said that she did exactly what the rule warns against in tying herself to one alliance and hoping it survived. But in retrospect, I'm not going to change my current self's mind based on what I previously said, like I did in Rule 2. Instead, I'm going to change what I said, back then, because this is something similar to what I said about Sophie. She didn't just hope the alliance survived. She worked to make it survive in the ways that we've already discussed. If Russell had been voted out, she would almost certainly have been doomed. But she played a role in ensuring that didn't happen. We just talked about that. Also, as we discussed already, she knew that coming across aggressively was not going to work. She picked up on the idea that Russell could be the steamroller and she could sit back and walk the easy path after he rolled over everybody.
Exactly.
Not everyone would get that. And as a matter of fact, earlier we listed off the people who did not get that. And then they were gone.
Yeah, for sure.
So now Russell, of course, had plenty of flexibility. We talked about how he made day one alliances with pretty much everyone and then just clip people off as needed. He could go in whichever direction suited him. Even after the merge, he continued to keep his options open, such as when he made a fake alliance with John and then a false promise to Brett near the very end. Even within his FOA 4, he knew that only 2 others could make it to the very end. And he apparently didn't decide on his final 3 partners until he got down to that point. Again, keeping his options open while convincing each of the others that they were definitely going to the end with him.
Yes, which again brings me back to his ability to have these conversations with each person and have it be so convincing. And he even noted that I have a final 2 with everybody, so I'm set. And for someone like Russell, who is that schemy, plotty individual, to still have the ability to convince all of them to go to the final 2 with him is incredible. It's incredible gameplay to have the ability to do that.
Yeah. And then there's Mick, who, actually did do what I said Natalie didn't. He hung on and hoped the alliance would survive. He didn't make the moves, and he knew at some point he was going to lose the game, but he still didn't do anything about it. He needed to claim the leadership that was given to him at the beginning of the game and take charge of a new alliance, putting himself into a position where he could make a run at the win. Would it have been a risk? Well, yeah, but it would have been less of a risk than sitting back and hoping that somehow, some way, he could win without making such a move. Now, you talked about a moment ago why, how he didn't do it. It was talked about, but he never did it. Now, I think that this was mostly due to physics. And that is Newton's first law. A body in motion will tend to stay in motion unless there is another force acting upon it from the outside.
That's a good point.
Yeah. The FOA foursome, say that.
FOA foursome.
Fast. Yeah. The FOA foursome was in motion towards the end of the game and no outside force could act upon it. So it seems like Mick couldn't or wouldn't act from within. He just kept going. The ball was rolling downhill and he was inside the ball.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I do think that that's something very similar we've seen in seasons since then. I'm thinking the Dominic and Wendell duo that was running the show. And we were all watching going, somebody's got to do something. But when something is working, it's very hard to convince someone who is within that working group that something needs to change. Because unfortunately, I do think a lot of times people, when they're playing Survivor, are just like, well, I want to make it to the end. And then they're hoping when they make it to the end that then all of a sudden everything that they've done is going to account for something. But unfortunately, if you are part of a group that is all doing the same thing and all working together, not everybody can get credit for everything that that group did. And unfortunately, you have someone like Russell, who is part of that group and who is leading that charge. And Russell's number 2 is Natalie. And so you kind of become a tag along at that point. And if you don't really step up and say, no, I did this, not him, not her, you just become one of the same. And then what does the jury do? They look at the group and go, well, they were all together the whole time. So who did what, and kind of ranking where they were in that group. And unfortunately for Mick, he ended up just becoming one of that group that was making it move forward on that trajectory.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, we move to the 4th rule, which tells players not to let their emotions control them. Natalie did pretty well here, going along with each vote, whether she was friends with the target or not, which, of course, is key for this rule. She played a social game, but at the same time, she voted out those to whom she was socially attached. And she even helped blindside them, just like the rest of the Foafoans.
I really have to give her a lot of credit for not utilizing her emotions when you would think that she should have. There were a few moments where those uncomfortable conversations that I've already referenced, that she was having them with Russell, and she was so in check, even when he was yelling at her that one time, and even when he was telling her she was going to get voted out, even when there was a lot of, like, they were talking about the Ashley vote, and she knew that she couldn't stop herself from voting for Ashley, even though she was close to Ashley, because she understood the ramifications of it. And so I do think that she kept her emotions in check way better than I think a lot of people would have credited her to do, because she just seemed kind of meek. And but I don't think it was being meek. I think she was just really maintaining her composure, knowing that this is what she needed to do in order to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know, of course, that Russell didn't have a problem with his emotions controlling him. He let plenty of emotions out, usually the one that begins with A, anger. But he didn't let them control him. As much as Natalie went along, he led the way in showing that he didn't care who you were or what you thought you meant to him. If he thought it was in his best strategic interest for you to leave the game, you left the game. He told us flat out he would use people and when they were helpful to him, and throw them away when he was done with them. And that's just what he did. He told me, I stepped into that game and threw away my morals and character and stepped outside who I am.
Well, and unfortunately, it bit him in the end.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But we'll get there. I won't jump ahead.
Yeah. And once again, we have a situation where Mick was similar to Natalie, just with us having less to say about it.
And again, Mick was a really, I don't think that he let his emotions control him just as Natalie did. But I also feel like he needed to be a little more emotional, if that makes sense, because I do think that there was an opportunity for him to really step up and be a little more aggressive, and he just wasn't, and he needed to be. So I think perhaps that could have helped him if he had kind of let go a little bit, but I don't know.
Yeah. All right. The 5th rule talks about the social game and reminds players they need to pretend to be nice. At the time of Samoa, the title of this rule just said, pretend to be nice, keep your politics and controversial beliefs to yourself. I added the part of this rule about playing the social game to the title specifically because of Russell. Now I didn't do it immediately after his loss this time, but I noted in a later version of the rules that after 2 Russell losses to people who were more social, I had to specifically put that into the title. But that said, before we talk about what Russell did wrong, let's talk about what Natalie did right, because she clearly did quite well here.
Yes.
She went out of her way to get to know her fellow players on a personal level. we saw her befriend the Galu women, which of course is what led to the Eric boot. She would talk about religion and Christian books and the like with both Laura and Brett, and who knows, maybe others at different times. Russell, we saw him saying about the Laura thing that it was stupid for her to be talking about that stuff, but it connected her to individuals, and that was something he could not understand.
And wasn't there someone who was complaining that Natalie was running around just chit-chatting with Laura when she had come over, and
that was
how
Russell,
that was
yeah.
And well, he wasn't complaining about it. No, he didn't complain about it. Somebody else was complaining about it, because Russell was complimenting Natalie. He's like, oh, she's doing a great job talking to Laura, because we're going to need Laura later. And
was it
Laura,
Liz? Did I confuse Russell and Liz?
I think it was Shambo, maybe.
No,
it wouldn't have been Shambo. No,
because Liz was trying to start the fire, and she was like,
yes,
why don't
it was
you,
Liz.
Yeah.
Yes, it was Liz. She was talking to, I don't know if it was Mick. It might have been Mick that she was talking to, but she's like, they're walking around just chit-chatting about like Book of the Month Club. And she was so frustrated. And Russell was the one that was like, this is great. And this is again why Russell needed Natalie, because Natalie was able to connect with people in a way that Russell couldn't. And she was so good at finding that common thread that they could talk about. And on my rewatch, I was truly impressed with her ability to fit in so well with people like Galoo, who they were voting out. And then she'd be laying in the shelter immediately afterwards talking about the game, but there was no ill will towards her for what had just transpired, because I feel like there was a connection, there was a friendship, and it was an interesting thing to see happen, because she was so invested in them as individuals that they didn't take it personally when she was part of a vote to take one of them out.
Yeah. It's interesting. In my mind, somehow that Liz conversation got transposed over to Russell. But you're right. Russell was saying, yes, it's a good thing, which means he did recognize somewhere up there that it was a good thing. And we'll talk about that in a second. He just couldn't go further. Let me put a pin in that. Hold on a second, because while we just discussed how she voted out, Natalie voted out the jurors just as Russell did. One thing she didn't do was she didn't make it seem like she enjoyed doing it so much. What she told me, as y'all saw, there were many times he behaved in a condescending way, laughing and not just laughing. Basically, this is the way I think the jury felt. They were taunted as they exited. That's a perfect impression of her, right?
That was so perfect.
Yes.
As y'all saw.
That's how I had it written. Yeah, that's what she said.
I love it.
And so, yeah, he was taunting them, but she, of course, didn't act that way. Brett described her to me as having, quote, a very personalized, very strong social game, which was not entirely communicated to the TV audience. The way in which she chose to operate was to be real with people and to find a human being in each of them. She was able to connect with people in ways the others could not. She made it to the end with character and ability.
Yes. And I'm going to jump ahead for just a second here, because I think that this is highlighted in a weird way by a question that Brett posed to Mick in the final tribal council, when he asked him if we were going to go on a bro date together, what would we do? And I think that comes directly from the relationship that he had formed with Natalie, that he and Natalie had a very close bond. And he actually recognized Natalie knows me as a person. Mick didn't take any time to know me as a person and to learn who I was. And so I think that's what that question was completely based upon.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, also to jump ahead, I don't know what was wrong with his answer. We'd wake up, we'd watch the news, and then, we'd hang out.
We do bro things.
Yeah. Well, that's very personalized,
Right.
Boy, you won him over.
But we unfortunately don't know if he asked the same question to Natalie, but I'm sure that if he did, it was a very specific answer.
Yes.
And that to me shows how well she did at knowing each person individually and spending time talking to them in that one-on-one type of atmosphere. And I keep mentioning it, but going back to like the sleeping arrangements, which we've talked about with who do you sleep next to? She was sleeping in the middle of glue members, which means she's involved in all of those conversations that are happening late at night when they're laying in that hut together, going to sleep. And so that all becomes very significant in how she and Russell can then play the game, because she's the one who's getting information that Russell's not getting.
Right. Speaking of Russell, we have a lot to say about him in this role. When I interviewed Natalie, she may have given me the understatement of the year in saying, I think also he wasn't humble at all. It was such an understatement, I couldn't even put on the fake accent. But to echo a different former Survivor player, you think?
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Natalie continued. He didn't really play the social. He didn't play the social part really at all. And yeah, this is obviously the main place where Russell's game went wrong. Now, I should start by acknowledging where it went right. Early in the game, we saw him trying to get the others to create emotional bonds with him, such as through his story about being in the hurricane and losing his dog, both of which were false. He wanted them to connect to him, even if he wasn't interested in connecting to them. And this was a smart idea, and it went along with what you mentioned about Natalie, him being happy that Natalie talked to Laura there. So it showed he theoretically knew how to play socially. But then he forgot all about it, perhaps because even that was about how other people reacted to him, or about how Laura reacted to Natalie, rather than how he reacted to other people.
Right. I really do think that this is where he went so far and then forgot that there are ramifications for how you treat people. And unfortunately, this is what we see in Survivor all the time. If you end up hurting someone on a personal level, it definitely affects their ability to judge your game because it becomes personal. And unfortunately, Russell missed out on that. Even though he was really great at having conversations with people and selling them on ideas and selling them on things, he forgot to recognize that, oh, when this comes back later and they realize that I was selling them a bill of goods, they're going to be upset. And I think even though John still voted for him in the end, that's something that I worried about on my rewatch with what happened with John. He had made a promise to John and then voted John out. And so that right there becomes much more personal than just this was a game move. And he allowed it to become more personal because he was having these conversations, selling them on these things. And then people felt almost violated at the end, where, that you did this to me. And Natalie, even though she was partaking in those same exact votes, the manner in which she did it was different, because it was almost like, yes, I recognize that this person is a person and I don't want to hurt them, and I'm not going to rub it in their face when something happens, and they're going to feel differently about it, that it's a game move as opposed to something that was done for personal gain and to be able to brag about it, if you will.
Yeah. And, John was just one of the people that he did that with. There's other perfect examples. Jason, Russell could have improved his standing with just a few words. Now, in the second rule, I say not to tell people when they're about to be booted. And that's true 99% of the time. But in this case, he should have told Jason he was being voted off, because after being such a tight four for such a long time, he could have given Jason a heads up just before tribal council, and it wouldn't have had quite the stinging pain. And he did that other times too. He would repeatedly give people false hope just before voting them out. Right. He did it to Dave. He did it to Brett, in addition to the two that we've already mentioned.
Yeah. And that's something that I do think people will remember and they'll resonate on, and they'll kind of let it get stuck in their brain. And then when they're having to listen to you justify why you did what you did, they're still going to feel like you did this to me. And even though it was part of your game, you took it a little step further because you did give me that false sense of hope and you didn't need to. And I think that that's where Russell pushed the envelope a little too much, is that sometimes he didn't need to go there, but he went there anyway. He would sit down and have these conversations and be like, okay, here's the deal. Here's what I can save you. I can make this. And I realized he was probably doing it to keep his options open.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what the individual on the receiving end is thinking. They're like, oh, well, he was keeping his options open and that's why he did this. No, they're looking at it as he was playing me and I got played and I got voted out.
Yeah.
And so it really is about how the person on the receiving end is going to respond to what it is you're doing, even though it might be a game move and it might be keeping my options open and that you really don't know what you're going to do yet. Unfortunately, if you're the person that's the one going home, it's going to feel different.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when it comes down to it, I'm not really sure that Russell understands what the term social game means, because he told me people say I didn't play a social game. I had a huge social game. I had Natalie on my coattails. I had Mick, Jason, and Shambo following me. That's why nobody put my name down. I'm like Jesse James. You don't want to draw your guns on him. They were scared to death of me. The difference between me and Jesse is I'm never going to take my guns off. It's crazy.
I'm sorry. Did you practice?
I did not.
That was pretty good. Oh my gosh. Whew, that was funny. That was really, like, you had the guttural Russ voice. That was better than your Natalie impression. I'll give you
well,
that.
good.
That was much better.
Yeah. Now, of that statement, if you could actually listen to it and not just enjoy my wonderful impression, the
funny.
smallest flaw was that only 2 of the people he mentioned were on the jury. It doesn't matter what you did to the other ones if they're there with you.
Right.
Now, the bigger flaw is that what he described isn't actually the social game. It's the strategic game, which we've already gone over. He did convince Natalie, Mick, Jason, and Shambo that he was trustworthy enough for them to follow him.
Mm-hmm.
But we never saw him having a social relationship with anybody.
Yeah. And I really do think that most of the conversations that we saw him having with those people who ended up on the jury were, as you mentioned, strategic.
Yeah.
And that does not equate to a social game at all. It just means that you're really good at strategy, but you're not really good at building relationships. And unfortunately, he was working with someone who was really good at building relationships. Well, he wasn't. And we've talked about this before, and I've said it. We just mentioned it with why Bob won. Sometimes the person that people just like more is the one that's going to get the vote in the end, because it doesn't feel personal. You don't have this thing with them that makes you feel like I don't necessarily like them or I don't trust them or there's something off. You have a good rapport with that person. And sometimes that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And so that was the social game. Then there's the whole pretending to be nice thing. Not only did he fail here, but he went in the opposite direction and was over the top arrogant and dismissive of those he opposed and voted off. As Rob pointed out in the main podcast, Russell talked about people to others, especially as he was targeting them. And it's likely that people passed those stories around in Ponderosa and maybe within the game too. Dave's change of heart made that clear. When he left, he said Russell played a better game. He said that he thought we all underestimated Russell, and that Russell was born to play this game. But then he voted for Natalie.
Mm-hmm.
And several players voiced similar things when I interviewed them. Jason said, and there's not a Jason impression here. Jason said, I just think there's a way to do things that doesn't piss people off. I think Russell played to get to the finals and not necessarily to win. The way he was playing was good, but there was another part of him that was like, when I move forward, I'm also going to rub your face in it. It was that part of it that really pissed people off and was bad strategy to get votes to win.
Yeah.
Mick told me as his ego just got bigger and bigger, it just got worse and worse. The way he treated people, it was pure idiocy to put those people on the jury and turn them into votes against him the second he opened his mouth. They just despised him. And then Natalie said similar things, which I quoted earlier. The three people who spent the most time with Russell throughout this game all said pretty much the same things.
Right.
We saw his ego and the way he sometimes rubbed his play in the face of others. I think there was even more to it than we saw.
Right. And one thing that I will mention, because you talked about Dave in particular, Dave Ball. You should actually, we should talk about Dave Ball because it's always Dave.
Danger, Dave Ball.
It's always Dave Ball. So I think it's interesting that he referenced that and then ended up voting for Natalie. And this is something that Russell has talked about repeatedly in his podcast and on various interviews, that Ponderosa is flawed because flawed. That's right. They go to Ponderosa and then they talk to each other, and the jury talks to each other about the game, and they might make up stuff that's not true. And then they try to figure out a way to manipulate the votes, which he claims that's what they were doing. From conversations that he's had with individuals since, that they were trying to figure out a way to give him third place instead of second. And I don't know if any of that went down, but I understand what he's talking about because obviously I've been through that Ponderosa experience. But I do think that what he's not considering is that once you go to Ponderosa, you're no longer in the game seeing what's transpiring. So you rely upon those people who are coming out of the game to fill in the blanks for you. That like, oh, well, this is what happened after you left. And this is what happened in between the time that you were at Tribal Council to the next time you get to go and watch Tribal Council, because you only see and learn so much in Tribal Council. So if you know that people are going to Ponderosa and are going to be filling in the blanks and are going to be talking about those individuals who will be sitting in the final three, that means you need to be very mindful of how those conversations are going to come across and what they're going to say about you. So it's not a perfect system at all. I'm not saying that he's wrong in his assessment that there are issues with Ponderosa, but unfortunately, that's just the way that the game is structured. And people need to have those conversations in order to try to make a determination as to who's going to win.
Yeah. And I do think I agree with everything you said. He's right that, yes, there's too much talking, but I don't know what the answer is. How do you find out the additional information without talking to everybody else? I mean, you could, you could do something similar to what Big Brother does, which is, send a DVD to them to watch of the challenges and stuff like that. But then it emphasizes challenges when it shouldn't necessarily. It shouldn't at all, really. I mean, you'll know, everybody should know challenges are not one of the rules. So I don't know. Now, it's interesting that he said that they were trying to get him to get third place, because obviously they didn't do that. And it's similar to some of the things we heard about Winners at War, where several people wanted to give Michelle second place, but they were so worried that Natalie would win that they had to vote, to give it to Tony, because they wanted Tony to win. They just wanted Michelle to have second place.
Yes. And I think that was the conversation, the way that he explained it, was that concern was that if they start splitting the votes, then all of a sudden something might go south and then Natalie won't end up winning. So I think that was an interesting thing to hear coming from Russell. And again, it's not the first time that or the only time that we've heard that. But I've suggested that there should be like live stream when you're on Ponderosa, like you should get to go watch it. But I don't know how they would do that. I don't know if it's possible, but it would be interesting to be able to see what is happening when you are outside of the game, if you are making that decision, because there are some missing pieces. And there were things that I was told happened that I never saw. And I would have loved to have known if they actually happened, but we'll never know. And so it's interesting to hear that was part of the conversations happening at Ponderosa. But if that's the conversation people are having, then you have to look at your game and say, well, what did I do wrong inside of the game to make them so dead set against me winning? Yeah.
Well, and there is one thing, because Russell himself told me, I embarrassed them so much. Wow, that was a bad accent there. It was too short a period there. I embarrassed them so much. I'm just going to drop it. I embarrassed them so much they had to put Natalie's name down. Well, yeah, maybe he should have thought of that before treating them in such a way as to put them in that position.
Yeah. Well, and how about the lead up to the final tribal council when it was, even though Natalie and Mick are obviously not voting in that final tribal council,
Mm-hmm.
the way he was speaking to them, like basically like how I just won $1 million and
Oh,
I
yeah.
won and I'm the best Survivor player ever and look at me and I'm so amazing. And Mick and Natalie are having to listen to this. And I know he was doing it because he was trying to get in their heads, before we go to this final tribal, I'm going to remind them how terrible they are and then throw them off their game. But it just, can you just celebrate the moment instead? Can the three of you just have your big breakfast and just be excited that you made it to the final three instead of making them feel bad and feeling like they're less than? Because it could backfire. You could get into final tribal and they could use that against you. I don't know if they did. We didn't see
Right.
that much, but that to me was another one of those moments where it was unnecessary and went overboard.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'll close out this rule by saying that once again, Mick was fine. He was nice enough. That was about it. He was certainly nowhere near as bad as Russell, but he also didn't create the personal connections that Natalie did, as you mentioned with the Brett Bro date.
Yes, clearly.
All right. The sixth rule warns against being too much of a threat. And this is where we see Natalie's main point of strategy come into play. In the first rule, I mentioned that there was more to her quote, and now we're here. And I'll do it without accent, since you said that my impression of her wasn't very good. She said, "I'm actually a pretty opinionated girl, but you have to keep yourself under wraps. You open your mouth one time, you could send yourself home, like Betsy, Marisa, and Liz. I noticed that the first and second day with Marisa, that wasn't exactly a great strategy to have." And that's where Natalie hit the nail on the head. If you stood up to Russell, you were gone. But if you stood by him and praised him and told him he was going to win and told him how great he was, he would keep you around. Russell thought she was just some, quote, dumbass girl that he could use to get to the end. And she played that role to perfection. Now, I know that sounds like kind of an insult, but it's really not. She saw how Russell dealt with threats, so she avoided becoming one. She became what he needed her to be, basically.
Yes.
Well, you think I'm a dumbass girl? Fine, I'll pretend to be one. She took this all the way to the end because Russell did not think for 1 minute that she could beat him in front of the jury.
Right. And I think that it was incredibly impressive on her part to recognize this so early on in the game and to kind of know what her role was and understand it as the game progressed. She never tried to take over. She never tried to stop Russell from being Russell, but she did manage him as, keeping him in the game the way that she did and stopping people from voting him out and doing all of those things because she recognized that she needed him too. There it goes. I told you it was going to fall, and it did. So unfortunately, the rules are gone. But yes, so I do think that her ability to find that out about him was so great that she utilized it to perfection. I really think that she did.
Yeah. Now, as for Russell, he should have been viewed as a huge threat to win, and the Galu should have eliminated him right away. But instead, they kept looking at it or looking in all the wrong directions. So that was never an issue for him. The one time that, I say it never was, there was one time that it was, he had an idol, he played it correctly, it didn't matter.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that the other FOA members were not looking at him in that way either. That when they did have the opportunity to kind of take him out, you want to have a big move, take out the guy that everybody thinks is that guy. And then Mick, all of a sudden you can talk about how I flipped the vote and I got everybody to vote out Russell.
Right.
And then people will be impressed with your ability to play the game, to strategize, and take out who is deemed to be the biggest threat. But unfortunately, the type of threat that Russell was not the type of threat that's going to get jury votes at the end. I mean, he was a threat for his ability to manipulate and to control things and to make people do what he wants them to do. But as far as earning jury votes for that, that's definitely a different story.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. If Mick had, as we discussed earlier, if Mick had overthrown Russell, we've talked about this before. If there's one main person that everybody's like, you got to get rid of them or they're going to win. You got to get rid of them or they're going to win. And someone gets rid of them, they become the hero. It happened in your own season.
For sure.
We got to get rid of Dave. We got to get rid of Dave. We got to not Dave Ball. We got to get rid of Dave. And then Adam is credited with getting rid of Dave. And everybody's like, woo, Adam, and they ignored Ken, who was the one who actually turned his vote after all that time. And they credited Adam with convincing Ken.
Right.
So yeah, you slay the dragon, you become the hero.
Right. Absolutely. And I do think that was a huge missed opportunity for someone like Mick, because Mick didn't have all of these tools in his toolbox, when it came to playing this game. They didn't view Mick as someone who was threatening, because Mick was not controlling things. He was not being the leader as he was supposed to be. And so you need to change that story of yourself. You need to have a better resume when you're sitting in front of the jury. And unfortunately, he didn't do anything that would have shown him to be a threat. The one thing that Mick really had going for him was his physical prowess, and how they were hoping that he would beat Brett in the end. So then Brett wouldn't be sitting there in the final three. And so there was that component to Mick. But as far as, the actual game itself, everyone on this particular rule kind of had a different way of handling it, if you will. I mean, I think that, Natalie, she leaned into that idea that she wasn't going to be a threat to win. Russ believed he was the biggest threat to win, and he leaned into that. And then Mick was kind of just in the middle and not wanting to be seen as a threat. So didn't really do anything to be a threat. So it was interesting to see the three of them react to this in such a different way.
Yeah. I mean, Mick was viewed as being a bit more threatening in the end than Shambo, but Russell kept him around, like you said, because he had a better chance of beating Brett. Fat lot of good that did. But other than that, Mick was fine. Like we often say in the rules so far, he was fine. Yeah. The seventh rule covers dealing with idols and advantages, and we know Russell was the idol king, finding them without clues, even digging the first one out of a tree right in front of everyone without them noticing.
How did they miss that?
Because no one had done that before. No one had ever gotten an idol without a clue like that.
But why is he in a tree? You know what I mean?
And he even said, they said, what do you do? And he said, looking for idols.
I did. He announced it. And they were like, oh, okay.
Yeah, all right, whatever, Russell. Yeah, you have fun, But, on TV, we saw him find the idols almost immediately, but he said on the reunion, and we have emphasized this before about other people, that he had to search and it took a long time. He was dedicated to it. He made sure he was the one who found them. After all, it's not like he was busy playing the social game.
Right.
Neither Natalie nor Mick really did anything in this regard.
Well, what I will say about Russell is I loved that he commenced the chase to get Dave Ball away from the wall when he was looking where he knew the idol to be. Yes. And then he went right back. That I thought was genius. I thought that was a great move. And I do think that it was interesting that on this season, so many of the clues were shared openly and everybody knew what the clues were. I thought that was really, really amazing that even Russell was sharing that information. He had the phone on that reward.
I still don't understand that. I watched it. I didn't understand it. Rob talked about it on the podcast. He didn't understand it. None of the guests understood it. Unless it was required that Russell share that, like the producers said, that's for everyone.
And that's what I'm curious about. Why did he pass it around and share it, knowing who he is and how idols are so much part of his gameplay, that he would then be like, all right, here it is. Yeah, I saw it. I'm good. I don't need to look at it again. That I thought was definitely weird.
I mean, with his ego, I could see him doing that. Just be like, I don't care. I'll give it to you. You're not going to find it.
Right. Well, and I'm curious too, if they're all utilizing the phone and you can't erase anything. Maybe they weren't allowed to erase anything. Then
Right.
you kind of look like a jerk if like you've been looking at it and then someone's like, oh, wait a second, did you see this? And you're like, oh yeah, I saw that. I just didn't
Yeah.
tell you. So it I think turns into a weird conversation.
Yeah,
So
or
maybe
I
that's
mean,
why.
he might have gotten to it and they might have seen him looking at it like, hey, what's that? You know, and
Yeah.
even if he has to pass it around, they're going to get to it eventually.
Right, exactly. So it's not
So.
too secretive, but that was definitely strange.
Right. Now, even with all that idol finding, people might say he only played one correctly. The first, he did indeed play unnecessarily in the first merge vote, as we discussed. But, you know, better to play it and not need it than, you know, and then find another than to not play it if you should have. Now, the third one, he took home as a souvenir. Okay, so he didn't need it because he controlled the game so well.
Right.
And even without playing the last one, finding it himself ensured that no one else would be able to surprise him.
Right. And he walked in, I will say, walking in wearing it, because it's one of those situations where they could have said, all right, let's vote for Russell just to see. Because knowing that Russell is so sure of himself and he was so convinced that he wasn't going home, maybe that would have been the opportunity, right? Where you take advantage of him kind of being off guard and say, well, let's vote him out because he's not going to play the idol. And they could have potentially flipped things at that point if they believed that he was only doing that for show, that he was wearing the necklace just for show and then ended up not utilizing it, because they did almost seem surprised that he didn't play it. They were all kind of like, what? He's not going to? So there was an assumption he would play it. So his mechanism by doing that, I think, worked out exceptionally well because it appeared as if he was going to. I mean, Jeff even said, if anyone has the hidden immunity idol around their neck and would like to play it, I thought that was hysterical.
Yeah. You know, now this was, of course, now, first of all, there was no reason for him not to play it. And second of all, this was in the early days before all the second and third level thinking started.
Right.
Okay, he is wearing it around his neck, so he's going to play it, but he knows that we know that, so he's not going to play it. But the thing is also, again, it was the last time. There was literally no point in him not doing it. So except
you're Russell.
Yeah. Show he was better than you. All right. Appendix A is about the rest of the tribe keeping their end goals in mind when voting, and says to vote out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. I think Russell, Natalie, and Mick generally followed this as they took out the threats of one type or another in Foa, then did so in the merged tribe as well. Closer to the end in episode 14, Russell said, you know, this game is in stages. And at this point, you have to think about who would get the most votes at the end. And he was right. You know, I mean, that's basically another way to say the way I have it broken down. You need to think also about who you want to face in the end. The problem is he was clearly wrong in his judgment about who would get the most votes in the end, because the reunion mock vote, for whatever that's worth, showed that if Russell had brought Jason and Shambo to the end, he might well have won.
Yeah, and I do think that's an unfair thing to do to people. Just going to throw that out there, CBS. Like it's kind of mean.
That's a fun thing to do.
Oh, I feel like it's a mean thing to do. But I think to Russell, it's you're judging the world that you're living in, right? And I do think that people have a tendency sometimes to have blinders on or not necessarily see what is actually transpiring. Because as you said before, you're kind of in it, right? And things are moving forward and things are progressing and things are working. And Russell was very sure of himself. And everything that Russell had done up to that point worked, right? I mean, he was getting people voted out. He was controlling the game. He was controlling the people in his own tribe. He was then decimating the other tribe. And so everything that he was doing up to that point worked. So why would he begin to second guess himself as to who he could beat in the end? Because in his mind, he was playing a perfect game. And so to look at anyone else and think, well, that person has the likelihood of beating me, knowing that he played a perfect game, in his mind, he felt like he was making the right choice.
Yeah. All right. Appendix B covers the jury phase and final tribal council. And if there was any question about how important that is for the season, once again, Just look at the poster and the shirt, you know.
Yeah, mine that has fallen down.
Yeah, yours
behind
fell
me.
down, but the shirt did it there. We see Russell and Natalie sitting in front of the jury, not Mick, as the presentation a part of the rules. Now, we already discussed in some detail how Russell made the jurors feel about him while they were in the game and outside of it. He egotistically gloated about how great he was for voting them out while they had to sit there and watch him do it. Definitely not smart. Then came final tribal council. Natalie's opening statement was fairly terrible in that she didn't say a thing about why they should give her the win or what she did in the game to deserve it. Russell, on the other hand, had what seemed to be a great opening statement in which he laid out everything he needed to and told the jury exactly why they need to vote for him. But that was the low point for her and the high point for him.
Yeah, and I will say this. Again, editing, tribal council,
Yes.
you don't get to see everything. And I'm sure that you've read the same things I've read where people claim that Natalie did much better in the final tribal than what was presented to her or what was presented of her. And so I think at that point, knowing that Russell has offended people in the way that he has who are sitting on the jury, his presentation was very strong and he was very proud of the moves that he made. But I do think that some of it could have been sold a little bit differently because a little bit salt in the wound, but not all of it. I mean, he did a great job, but it's kind of like a balancing act where, like Laura, I thought he did well with Laura, trying to get her to understand that she was the most threatening person on Glue, and that's why he had to vote her out. That's the kind of stuff that definitely wins you points. But if you start reminding people of things that you did and why you voted people out, you need to pat them on the back and stroke their egos as to why you voted them out, as opposed to that was a great move on my part that I did that. Make that person feel like there was a reason why they got voted out. So then that way they're not reminded of, yeah, that really sucked for me, as opposed to, oh, I see. You were threatened by me. You were scared of me. And that's why you had to vote me out. So I think that could have helped a little bit.
Yeah, he was kind of, again, the anti-Bob. We talked about Bob in Final Tribal Council not really wanting to talk himself up. And Russell, that's all he did.
Right.
But I do feel like, well, you already said it. Parts of the jury were obviously cut. We didn't see them beat up on Russell as much as I remembered. And some juicy parts clearly were left out because he admitted in an answer to one question that he felt his chances of winning had decreased to about 55%.
Right.
So now clearly he was still overestimating, but what I saw would not have convinced me to vote for Natalie, even on the rewatch. I sent you a text saying, well, I just finished. I'm still not sure why they voted this way. It's times like this that I really wish we could see the whole final tribal council.
Yeah.
You have CBS All Access, Paramount Plus now, whatever they had at the time. Show it. Why not show us? Come on, guys. Did Natalie do a better job than we were led to believe, like you said? Was it all due to other people like Eric and Brett arguing her case for her? After all, Eric went into detail about how her strategy should not be viewed as inferior to Russell's, and Brett emphasized the importance of personal connections. Maybe most of them planned to vote for her anyway, although Brett told me, no, everybody was open, but a lot of times people say that.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Well, and according to what Russell Hantz has said, we discussed it previously, they were discussing the vote and they didn't want him to even get second. And apparently he walked out of that final tribal still thinking he won, even despite the 55%. He still thought he had won. And Shambo was the one that allegedly called him weeks later to say, you didn't win. Just letting you know, like you didn't win. And he still didn't want to believe that he didn't win at that point. So I do think that we missed a lot. We definitely missed a lot. And obviously there's discussions being had at Ponderosa about who they think should and shouldn't win. And I do think that this is one of those situations where you had three people who had played this game together from the start. And everything that they did was together. And that, I think, is part of the reason why you end up potentially losing in the end, because each person is going to be viewed as one team, and then you start equating each person on that team and what did each person do on that team in order to get you to the end. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the focus was on how did you treat people being part of that team. And being part of that team meant the other ones over here were either treated okay or treated crappy, and that's why they ended up sitting in the jury. And so I do think that became part of those conversations too, that we need to separate each of these people out. While he was a great strategist, he didn't make us feel good about it and has reminded us ever since. Whereas Natalie, well, she was strategizing with him and still made us feel okay in the end.
Right. Now, I do have to say, okay, so Russell has said these things about what supposedly happened in the jury. I'm going to emphasize supposedly because we don't know. I mean, those people were not friends toward him. Shambo was the only one. And the problem was those people probably weren't discussing with Shambo what they were going to do in the votes because they knew where she stood.
Right.
So how did he know? As far as I can think, he's never even sat on a jury. He went to final three,
true.
voted out early.
Yeah.
So he, I don't know how he would have heard that necessarily or how valid it is.
Right. I mean, he gave names. He claimed that he and Monica have become very close and they chatted a lot about what transpired and that she would have changed her vote, that Dave wanted to change his vote, that they voted incorrectly. And I think I don't know if it was Eric, but there was 3 people that said that they voted wrong, allegedly. I don't know, but that's what he said.
Well, allegedly, and also the whole part of the game is at the time.
Right. For sure.
Not reflecting back on it, watching the game, thinking about it. I mean, the same thing happened, with Aubrey at the end of their season when Michelle won, where several of them came out afterwards and said, oh, well, I would have voted differently if I had known this. Yeah, that doesn't do Aubrey any good,
Right.
It doesn't. And all you're doing is you're now hurting Michelle because at the time she got your vote, but, and the same thing is here, plus I would want to hear it from those 3 people rather than.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Russell.
And I do think that this emphasizes that point that we as a survivor, like when you're playing the game, you don't get to see what's transpiring. And when we sit down and watch the season, we have no idea what they're going to show. And so sometimes as a player, you're surprised. You're like, oh, so-and-so did that? I didn't even know. I didn't know that had happened. And, and you don't know what conversations people are having and the strategizing that people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you watch Samoa, who do you see? You see Russell. Russell. Right. You see Russell controlling the game. You see Russell really running the show. And the only reason I've loved Russell and thought he was a great Survivor player ever since I've seen him play the game. And I never really thought that highly of Natalie White. It wasn't until I did this rewatch and I focused on Natalie that I started to see a different side of things. And so I do think that sometimes watching the season unfold as a player, you might start to rethink certain things that you did or certain things that happened in the game and the woulda, coulda, shouldas. And so maybe that's what ended up happening is that they watched the Russell heavy edited version and went, oh yeah, he really was running the show and he really was in charge. And maybe I shouldn't have voted for her.
Right. Yeah. That's why one of my favorite questions to ask that I asked just about everybody when I used to do Survivor interviews was, what did you see on TV that you didn't know about while you were there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And some people would be like, wow, all this was going on. And other people would be like, nothing. No, I always was in control and knew exactly what was going on.
Right. Yeah.
So
crazy.
It was always interested. Now, getting back to Russell, because Russell. The key is that he was completely disconnected from the jury in pretty much every way possible. He had his assumptions that they should vote for him because of his reasons, but he failed to understand that not everybody thinks the same way. It's similar to a problem that I would say we often see in politics. 2 people can have different opposing points of view, and neither of them can conceive how the other person can think that way. You're not putting yourself into another person's shoes. You're only thinking about how you view the world.
Right.
This jury did not value the same type of gameplay that Russell did, or at least not as highly. As Russell said on the reunion, he took the game very seriously, and he thought he won for sure because he thought everybody took it seriously. And then he said, quote, but obviously not.
Yeah.
I said earlier that Russell did an excellent job of laying out his main points in his opening statement. But unfortunately for him, those points were not what this jury was looking for. Some of my readers at the time sent in comments that hit the nail on the head. One said, he didn't know what made the jury members tick. Another noted, he failed to recognize how his ego, behavior, and attitude affected the people who would ultimately be voting for a winner. A third said, you have to know who you are up against and gear your game in order to win them over. And perhaps the most on-the-nose comment was, Russell lost sight of who had the final power in this game.
Yeah.
He expected them to act in a certain way, but they were their own individual people with individual minds. They were not robots. He had not programmed them. Whether he liked it or not, they got to decide how they would base their votes.
Yes.
As Jason told me, the most insightful statement of the entire jury process was Eric's at the very end, where he asks what really makes those characteristics that make Russell a great player more valuable than characteristics that make Natalie a great player.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is the very interesting dynamic of Survivor, is that what type of person do you want to represent your season? And that's why the jury becomes such a significant component, because they are deciding who that face of the season is going to be. And do they want Russell Hantz to be the face of their season, the winner that they choose? Or do they want Natalie White to be the face of their season? And for them, they're living it. They have lived it. This is in the moment. This is when it just happened. And we are looking at it through a camera lens and what CBS has put out there for the world to see, and whether or not she was under edited and things that she did weren't included. I mean, everyone has said this is a very heavy Russell season. And if you like Russell, you love Samoa. If you don't like Russell, you hate Samoa because you see so much of Russell. And so he is very much in a viewer's face. And so when you see the final outcome, you're like, how did that happen? But for people who were living it and experiencing it, they had to grapple with that. Like, do I want to reward the guy that made me feel like shit? Or do I want to reward the person who made me feel good about myself, even though she voted me out? And so those are conversations that the jury members have to have, and they do have. And I realize that there could be some issues there with whether or not it's a flawed system, but that's the system that it is. And that's what Russell needed to be mindful of in how he was treating people.
You have to say it right. A flawed system.
I'm not going to try to do any Russell Hantz impressions here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was Russell's actions at the final tribal council that cost him the game.
No, I don't think so either.
I mean, he didn't help himself, but I do think that who he took with him played a big role. And we already talked about this some, that if he would have brought Shambo and Jason, the jury at least claimed on the reunion that Russell would have won. Russell probably thought that Shambo was a guaranteed vote in his favor from the jury, which of course is something you always want. It's part of this rule. Put people who will vote for you into the jury.
Right.
But we also mentioned how he wanted Mick around to try to beat Brett for immunity. The thing is, Russell should have known that there was no way Shambo could ever beat him in front of the jury because she was the Galoo traitor, even more hated than him.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
And then even Jason had encountered problems with several of the jurors previously, including those who thought he had checked out of the game and would never have voted for him to win.
Yeah. No, I think that is a fair point, because I was curious that myself, that someone like Shambo was so disliked by Galoo because she was the traitor, and she was very vocal about it, that she had completely turned her back on all of them. And when you have a jury that is made up of Galoo, and you have a Galoo who could be sitting next to you saying, yeah, I turned my back on all of them, I do think that there is a lot of potential there to garner some favor, because you've got the traitor sitting next to you. And then if you have the individual that people think checked out of the game, who's left? Yeah. The guy who might have pissed you off, but he didn't check out of the game for sure. And he also wasn't a traitor. He was very loyal to his people up until the end.
Right. Right. Now, just be glad that Shambo wasn't in the final three, or else you might have had to put your hair into a shambolicious hairstyle.
She had been rocking that for 23 years up to that point. So.
Yes. Wonder if she still is.
I don't know. It's a good question.
Now, I find that here in this Appendix B, I don't really have much of anything more to say about Natalie. You know, I mentioned that she started slow, but then the jurors helped her make her own case for her. And, you know, it really seemed pretty clear by that point that she just had to articulate a few things and not screw up. Although, as I mentioned, even at the end, I would not have thought she was going to win. You mentioned that you had read and heard that she did a better job, that we just didn't see it. And this is where I don't understand CBS's editing. I understand showing Russell all the way through because he's out there. He's huge. He's Russell. But at the very end, why are you not going to show us some good things about Natalie to explain why it happened? Did they want the controversy? Did they think the controversy brought more attention? Maybe.
Possibly because of heroes versus villains.
Yeah. And that could be why. I don't know. But either way, I don't really have anything more to say about Natalie in this rule.
No, I think that's about covered it.
And then there was Mick, the guy we always forget.
I don't forget Mick. It's just he's the third one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do forget him. And so did Eric Reichenbach. But you know, his points to the jury made it seem like he already figured he had lost and he was just happy to be there. And that's how the jury responded. And it's also true, because I asked him afterwards if he thought he had a legitimate shot to win. And he said, well, you know, I had hoped there was a possibility. I didn't really feel going into it that I was going to win. I was happy to make it as far as I did, beating out 17 people, coming in with such a minority. I was really happy with that accomplishment. I really didn't think I was going to walk away with $1 million.
Yeah, that's kind of a dejected attitude to have walking into it.
Yeah. So that explains why he was acting that way, because that was how he felt. So with all of that said, and I do mean all of that.
I know there's so much.
Yeah, it's about time to wrap things up. What are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts. I wrote something down because I know we need to address this. Eric's speech. I know that you mentioned it, and I know that it's one of the more revered and renowned speeches that, you know, final tribal council speeches that are out there in the world. First of all, he sounds like David Blaine. If nobody knows that, just find his final speech, play it on YouTube, but don't watch it. He sounds just like David Blaine. I'm just going to say that. But I do think that he has some very incredible points in his final jury speech in regards to what transpired. When he said, Natalie, people will call you weak. People will say that you are undeserving. But why are any of those characteristics any less admirable than lying, cheating, and stealing? Why does he get a free pass, but your wrong way of playing is admonished? If there is one thing I have learned in this game is perception is not reality. Reality is reality. And you are sitting there, and that makes you just as dangerous as any one of those guys there. You say that you are probably the least deserving of the title of sole survivor, but maybe, just maybe, in an environment filled with arrogance, delusional entitlement, maybe the person who thinks she is the least deserving is probably the most. I think that is a really incredible explanation of Natalie as a person. She was humble, and you spoke about that, how she said he wasn't humble. Russ was not a humble person. Natalie was. And I think when you have that combination of things and you know what you have to offer the world, that's what Natalie did. Natalie walked into this game recognizing how she would be perceived, recognizing what people would think of her, and then having it affirmed by Russell. And so you walk into this game needing to understand who you are as a person. She did. She played this game with someone who thought those things about her, and it worked to her advantage. So to say that Natalie is not deserving, I think gives her very little credit for her complete understanding of the game of Survivor and the complete understanding she has in herself. She used Russell the same way Russell used her. Unfortunately, though, Russell's utilization of Natalie and other people in the tribe made them feel less than, and Natalie made people feel significant and important to her on a level that Russell wasn't able to do. And so I think Natalie was a perfect combination of all of those things that do make a good survivor player, because she recognizes things in herself. She's able to hold back those issues that, she said, I'm not going to be vocal. I'm not going to be aggressive. So she understood how she needed to interact with all of these individuals who she was playing a game with. Russell didn't do that. Russell didn't understand that the power is going to shift, and that those people that you might be offending, those people that you might be making feel bad about themselves, are the same people that are going to be rewarding that gameplay. And if they don't feel good about you, they might not want to give you the money. And so I think it's really interesting that Eric pointed that out, that why should she be treated any less deserving than someone like Russell, who was lying, cheating, and stealing. And that is the quintessential essence of Survivor, right? You have to outwit, outplay, outlast. And you need to do that in a way that fits your persona and it fits who you are. And that's what Natalie did. Russell tried to do that, but he forgot that one key component. And in order to win Survivor, you have to win over the jury too. He forgot about that. He thought his strategy and his gameplay was going to rule the day and that everyone would appreciate how he played the game. Natalie's interactions, the personal relationships that she formed with these individuals, is what really ruled the day. So congratulations to her for recognizing that. And Mick, I'm not forgetting about you, but you didn't get any votes, and I'm so sorry about that. But I am happy to see that Mick at least feels comforted where he ended up. He's happy with the way he played the game, and he can feel good about himself because he did manage to make it to the final three.
Yeah.
So those are my final thoughts.
Yeah. So this is a long conclusion for me, even longer than usual, because I have some additional things I wanted to bring in and I didn't know where else to put them. I'd like to start with some of what Brett told me in his postseason interview. He said the general TV audience may look at the season and say Russell played the most strategic game. But, and this is something that you brought up way at the beginning of the podcast, quote, the game is such a complex system and there are so many different types of strategies that can be executed. Natalie had an excellent social strategy, which is a little more difficult to communicate to the audience. And indeed, this is something we still see today. Survivor has difficulty communicating this type of game to the audience. But it's not just the audience who felt this way. Russell obviously did as well, telling me, I'm effing really pissed off. It's an effing shame that the bitch that jumped on my back the whole time, wrote my coattails, won the game. I played that game better than anybody in history. And you tell me I can't win because I got a bunch of sore losers on the jury? Probably the worst jury in history. They was dumb as hell anyway because they went to the merge 8-4 and they can't even keep that. It baffles my mind that I didn't win this game. I thought for sure I was winning. And by the way, when I said effing, he didn't say effing. While I can't disagree with his assessment about Galoo managing to blow their overwhelming majority, the rest of what he said showed his limited view of Survivor strategy. Everybody who has ever listened to this podcast knows that I believe jurors should respect a superior strategist. But Russell made that very difficult by making them hate him. Jurors are human, and players cannot ignore the human element if they want to win the game. And that's exactly what Russell did. As Natalie told me, you know as well as I do, I'm a huge fan. The social part is a huge aspect. So I'm sorry, you can't play one aspect of it and ignore the others. You can't neglect the social aspect. That's your own fault. The funny thing is that the whole end of the season was discussed in episode 4. We could have just stopped watching them. People sometimes ask, David, why do you and Jessica watch the whole season just to talk about the winner? Can't you just watch the last few episodes? And this is a perfect example.
I wish we could.
Yeah, no kidding. But it's a perfect example of why. Russell said, I need somebody to be able to help me to the final 2. So I'm going to have to take somebody like Natalie with me because she's going to ride my coattails the whole way. She's too stupid to do it by herself. She needs me. So I could stand up there and say she followed my coattails the whole way. She rode me like a horse. I wish I had done that in Russell voice, but once I started, it was too late. Natalie said, I'm his wingman. I definitely think people underestimate me, and I want them to think that it's really smart for them to take me to the end because they can beat me. Use that to my advantage. If it comes down to me or him, I know I can beat Russell in the very end because I would say a lot of other people in the tribe have really been rubbed the wrong way by him. So I'm just trying to not ruffle feathers, steer clear, build some good relationships, which is what I'm good at. So that was back in episode 4. Russell's view of the future didn't come true. Natalie's did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I said earlier that Natalie understood people while Russell understood strategy. And she also understood that there were other important factors, especially with this jury. All of the finalists voted out the entire jury. By making personal connections to them, she gave them an alternative to the leader of the crew that did them in. Russell thought it was stupid for her to be talking to them about that sort of thing, but it connected her to individuals. That was something he just couldn't understand. Russell was indeed the superior strategist, schemer, plotter. He planned out the path for himself and his allies to get to the end. He gleefully executed those strategies and had supreme confidence in his abilities. Confidence that turned out to be 100% correct, right up until the outcome was no longer in his own hands. It wasn't Russell's strategy that failed. It was his personality. He failed to take into account that not everybody played Survivor the way he played Survivor. He used people as pawns in this game, which was fine, but he also treated them as pawns in this game without feelings of their own, and that was not fine. Natalie combined some strategic ability with a lot of the social game. For the jury and against that opponent, it was the perfect mixture, and that is why Natalie won.
Excellent.
So, there we have it.
It is like 2 hours again. Oh my! Well,
of course it is. I mean, we're talking about a whole season.
Basically. I know.
So, all right, let me remind everyone that the rules we just discussed are now available as a poster, which you can't see for Jessica's side because it's. I'm
gonna get it. Here we go.
Falling down. Oh, there it is. Now you can see it. You people listening, you still can't see it. Nope. But and of course, T-shirts. In fact, 2 different types of T-shirts plus a mug. For the shirts or mug, go to robhasawebsite.com or robhasapodcast.com. Click on the merch link and then browse or search through the designs. For the poster, go to tinyurl.com/DavidRulesPoster2. As we do wrap up, let me remind everybody, or I want to encourage everybody to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. I hope you guys, listen to this with a pen and paper in hand so you can write down all these. I know
there's so much to remember.
We're in the middle of the month. We're approaching the end of the month. So I would actually recommend you just wait a week and then start at the beginning of May, because that way you'll only be charged for May, not for the last week of April. Once you do join, you'll see that the RHAP patron program has so many different ways to have fun and interact. There's Patron Family Feud, Patron Mafia, and more. There's a patron-only follow-up podcast for each Survivor season. And, of course, there's still the monthly patron call-in shows and a weekly Q&A show with Nicole. And when Rob isn't talking directly to everyone, there are Facebook groups that keep you occupied with a great community of people, including both of us, where you can talk about Survivor, Big Brother, The Circle, or just life in general. Remember to go to robhasawebsite.com/patron. And once you get to the Facebook groups, make sure to say hello.
You can also say hello to us on Twitter. I am Jessica Lewis 89. Here I am, right at the bottom there. And he is at David Bloomberg. Again, that's for Twitter, at Jessica Lewis 89, at David Bloomberg. You should follow us. I know it's hard to do. It's backwards. You should follow us both. Get both sides of the conversation. Once Survivor starts again, we will be live tweeting the episode. So that will be wonderful. And also, I should mention that David Bloomberg has recently joined up to Instagram. And yes. So, maybe you want to follow him there too. I'm at Instagram at Jessica Lewis 6789. So if you would like to follow me on Instagram, you could do the same, but you should check out David Bloomberg on Instagram. Yeah,
I think I'm at david.e.bloomberg, which was just sort of like, I didn't want to be David Bloomberg with a bunch of random numbers. Yours aren't random. They're not, but I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I will fully admit I don't know what I'm doing on Instagram. my son is laughing at me. I have no clue, but yeah, go ahead and follow me.
Yeah. Follow
Who
us.
knows? Who knows? And definitely follow Jessica. Now, going back to Twitter, it was funny because looking back at my old articles, it seems like this season was right around the time I started on Twitter, because at the end of each article, it says, now you can follow Reality News Online on Twitter. So as if it was something new.
Mhm.
So I'm guessing that's about when I started on Twitter there.
Nice.
Now, also for those of you with iPhones or iPads, there's another social media outlet that you may have heard about, which is Clubhouse. Jessica, still patiently waiting for them to open up to Android users.
Please.
You can find me on there as at David Bloomberg also. And there is an RHAP club as well, which is pretty active. I also have invitations I can give out. So if anyone needs me, hit me up on social media. I can do the invite.
Look at you.
Yeah.
You don't know how to use Instagram, but you're doing Clubhouse.
That's right. That's right. So I've done actually I've been on a couple of panels on Clubhouse that have, well, I was going to say have nothing to do with reality TV, but one dealt with the conspiracy beliefs of a particular former Survivor player. So it had a little bit of reaction interaction with Survivor. But
nice.
Anyway, going back to Twitter, the hashtag for all of these, of course, our normal hashtag is YXLost, but for this one is Why Natalie Won. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to all of the RHAP Survivor podcasts at robhasapodcast.com/survivor or on your favorite podcatcher. We are also on the Reality TV Wrap Ups feed and encourage you to subscribe there as well. In both places, you'll find a wide variety of great content, including, of course, the Survivor season countdown. You'll also find on the Wrap Ups, if you watch Big Brother Canada, tons of Big Brother Canada stuff there, and The Circle. And as a matter of fact, speaking of The Circle, I will be in a few hours on The Circle Roundtable to discuss episodes 5 through 8. So you can, watch for me there. If this comes out before that, who knows? It may be moments before. And really, since this is a 2-hour podcast, you're going to have to listen to it quickly.
Right.
But, even if you don't watch live, I think it's live. Even if you don't watch live, you can catch it afterwards. So
excellent. I hope that goes well for you.
Thank you.
I would also like to say thank you to Scott St. Pierre for all of the editing that he does here on our Why Blank Lost podcast, both the audio and visual audio. I did that again.
Yes.
Audio and video version. So thank you so much, Scott, for all of the wonderful work that you do. And the quick turnaround last week was like this. It was amazing. So thank you. And then also thank you to Will from America for our super catchy theme song. We love it. And we've heard some comments about it recently. So keep listening. Check that out. It's a very catchy tune. So thank you very much, Will. We enjoy that immensely. So appreciate it.
All right.
And thanks, David.
Well, and thank you, Jessica, for joining me once again to talk Survivor, revisiting the season that had one of the most controversial results ever.
I know. And listen, when you told me we were going to do back-to-back weeks, I was a little bit frustrated with you. But as always,
what? You never get frustrated with me.
Never. No, I will say though that I was enjoying this rewatch because it is a controversial season. So thank you for adding this to our list of choices and for beating me in that arm wrestling match like you did.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But for anyone, wondering why are you not doing All Stars? Well, that would be because it would be back to back to back. And that's just a little bit much. Yeah. So plus, I don't think it's nearly as much of a mystery, the outcome of that one. So
yeah.
As a matter of fact, it may be very similar to what we just discussed, but
right.
Multiplied more so.
Right.
But we won't be back next week, but I would say, a couple, 3 weeks, we will be back here. And so just keep your eyes and ears open and you'll know when we're here again. Of course, like I just mentioned, if you just need to hear more from me or see more of me, I will be on that panel later today. And, so watch or listen and we'll see everybody pretty soon for the next look at why somebody won.
Bye.
Bye.